Hello. Today we're going to talk about superheroes. It kind of escaped your notice, but the world went crazy for superheroes over the last decade, culminating in the all-encompassing, culture-swallowing, multimedia marketing nuke that was Avengers Endgame. While this cultural behemoth was embodied by Disney's Marvel franchise, there were many variations on this theme by different studios, with superheroes involved in horror movies like Brightburn, or westerns like Logan, found-footage movies like Chronicle, and even slapstick comedies like Deadpool. No genre was safe, and it is easier to name actors who haven't been in a superhero movie than those who have. But while the coronavirus pandemic lays waste to ticket sales, shutting down theatres, and forcing the movie industry into shutdown, it gives us time to reflect on why these fun but admittedly silly movies, TV shows and comics, dominated pop culture of the last decade. It's not like superheroes were invented in 2008 with The Dark Knight, but that movie still made over $1 billion and won Oscars. Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy had spanned the first decade of this century. Tim Burton's Batman had begun a fast-deteriorating franchise in the 80s, while Richard Donner's Superman was captivating audiences back in the 70s. And this is to say nothing of the fact that the comics that were these characters' origins had their golden age in the 30s, 40s and 50s. So why were superheroes so huge in the 2010s? Because, just as they always have done, superheroes reinforce the status quo. To understand what that means, let's go back, and to use an overused trope of the genre, look at the origin story of this phenomenon. Skipping over the influences on the earliest superheroes like Edgar Rice Burroughs' John Carter, we'll go right to patient zero. Superman. First published in Action Comics in 1938. Created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, both children of Jewish immigrants, Superman is an all-powerful Ubermensch who also happens to be an immigrant, who is also quite literally draped in the American flag. Created at a time of open hostility towards Jewish people by the Nazis in Europe, the Superman is a hero whose past is deeply rooted in the politics of his time, fighting for such noble goals as truth, justice, and the American way. Superman was created at the dawn of nations as superpowers with weaponry to go along with it, but equally portrayed the mild-mannered reporter working for the constitutional right to freedom of speech, while also hiding a foreign-sounding name to better fit in. He is a power fantasy at a time when two Jewish men felt very powerless in the face of such global upheaval. Move this formula forward throughout the rest of the 20th century and you have superheroes who are wealthy self-made billionaires, or wealthy inherited billionaires, mutants coming out to the wider world and suffering persecution because of it, teenagers with the weight of the world on their shoulders, and, Norse gods. But to take a hero like Captain America, who just is a walking American flag created purely as propaganda during the Second World War, a character that is an example of the explicit politics of his origin, and to translate him into 2010, demands a level of deconstruction, something comics had already done to superheroes in the 80s. In 1986, the serialized comic Watchmen by Alan Moore was published, which took superheroes as if they were real, placing them in real-world situations. This revealed them to be misogynists, rapists, disinterested gods, sociopathic madmen, and villains who are ultimately the winners. Throughout the 80s, comics attempted to reconcile the inherent problems of superheroes in that they acted without consent in multiple nations in the interests of America, harmed or captured people without due process of the law, and generally acted without oversight in the name of the people. People, incidentally, who were not featured in these comics beyond being a love interest, occasional henchman, or as a background character to be saved. Despite the comics and movies going for a more psychological verisimilitude, since then the industry has never truly reconciled the fact that these characters are mostly white men acting on behalf of a white, English-speaking nation, with only notable exceptions like Black Panther. All of which brings us to today. The reasons these same superheroes re-emerged as a global force, largely from America, was that at a time when faith in American institutions was shaken by the multiple tremors of a war ordered on false pretenses and a financial crisis that only saved the already wealthy, the need for strong figures of a nationalistic identity who held vaguely inclusive views about diversity and a progressive view on surveillance and autonomy were exactly what the public wanted. Disney and Warner Brothers may try to deny it, but their characters are products of recent politics. This was the modern third way of politics that was purportedly neither conservative nor left-wing, a purely liberal ideology akin to the Obama era of politics, and is at the core of these superheroes. This is from an era of enhanced surveillance, ICE agents, predator drone strikes, and growing inequality and civil unrest. This, it seems, is what Superman meant by the American way. But the times they were a-changin', and the superheroes did their best to stop that from happening. We can see this in the villains of these stories, who often correctly identify the issues of the day. Thanos pointing out modern precarity, lack of a sustainable economic model, and humans' impact on the environment. Killmonger's demand for racial equality and a black nation within America, echoing Malcolm X in many ways, and Ultron, who even points out the hypocrisy in the superheroes' argument, that the Avengers want to save the world but don't want it to change. But these are radicals, depicted as murderous villains, conquerors, or genocidal maniacs. These are other people's politics, to use a phrase from an excellent book. And yet it is precisely the heroes of these stories that have brought to the fore the real-life antagonists of today. In my book, Times Lie, I discuss modern society's need for heroes and why that is a problem. A hero is a person of great deeds, great emotion, great speech, and so on. But if they are fleshed out to seem human, with warts and all, their faults are subsumed by their grand adventures that save the world. Yet this also saves them from confronting the real issues that face the world today, i.e. inequality, poverty, discrimination, exploitation, class war, racism, and so on. Ultimately, then, Captain America and his team are great, they are good, and they do what must be done. This is the self-confessed American way. They are the nominative heroes of the story, praised and idolized by the masses both on-screen and off-screen. So it is no wonder you have a president who hugs and kisses the flag. The quality of the person doesn't matter so long as they are a hero, striving to maintain our current way of life. This demand for this kind of hero was born out of neoliberal politics, and has continued through to Trump's neoconservatism, or fascism as some call it, without any cognitive dissonance. Both could be seen as heroes or villains, while both have argued to, at best, maintain a status quo that leaves millions behind, or at worst, go back to the era when superheroes were first conceived, a time that was even worse for those same people being left behind today. The 2010s were an era of massive social and political upheaval, the kind of change that meant disruption for everybody. The superheroes that dominated Western culture in that time embodied the public's desire to keep things the same, to resist this all-encompassing change on the horizon. They could see it coming, but fought against it. Superheroes were born in a time of white supremacy, and today are still portrayed mainly by white male actors named Chris. The Dark Knight sequel even confronted the Occupy Wall Street era of post-bailout politics, but, in the end, opted for a return to normality instead of depicting any meaningful change afterwards. Now, in a time that will be shaped by our current pandemic, what will happen to these superheroes? The world they fought so hard to maintain will be long gone, with the behemoth studios that finance these productions, while not needing a bailout, certainly won't have the audience demand nor the financial ability to continue these gargantuan franchises for the next few years. It seems that Avengers Endgame was more timely than we realized. In the movie, the snap that destroyed lives and brought society to its knees was undone and dismissed with simply another snap. We won't have that option once the coronavirus has swept through the population, killing millions as it does, and there won't be any heroes to save us from it. In the space of less than a year, the biggest pop culture franchise in history has been made irrelevant. The one villain they couldn't fight, it seems, was change itself. Today we learned when superheroes were made, what superheroes are made of, and what superheroes represent in that they were never agents of social change, merely maintainers of a deadly status quo and should be left in the racist past that they sought to enforce. Be sure to note this down in your exercise books, as this will come up in later videos. Thanks for watching.